with Miranda, your information gateway.
How are you doing this week? Hope all is well. Got a great show coming up today, actually. After the tragedy of Grenfell, it's kind of touched and worried a lot of people throughout the country, especially in Bristol. The headlines in mainstream media, are our tower blocks safe? The headlines in certain mainstream media, local mainstream media, would lead you to believe that the new cladding being put on certain tower blocks is flammable. Of course, if you read on through the article, you'll find out actually they couldn't set fire to it. But still, it's worrying. People are worried. Social media is full of comments about, is it affecting schools? Is it affecting hospitals? How far is this problem spreading? So who better to speak to than the Cabinet Minister for Housing, Paul Smith. Paul Smith, a great guy, offered to come in on the show, and let's just get to the nitty-gritty of it all. Let's get to the truth. Let's find out really what is going on with our housing in Bristol, and what are Bristol City Council doing about it. We have all heard and are sickened by the recent tragedy of Grenfell. There's been much speculation about the safety of tower blocks in Bristol, despite local and mainstream media scaremongering headlines. I thought we'd get to the truth of the matter, and who better to help me do this than Paul Smith, Cabinet Member for Housing for Bristol City Council. Hi, Paul.
Hiya.
Right, okay, let's see if we're starting. Hi, hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you now, thank you. A few gremlins in the pipelines tonight. We've also got Colin Moody from the One Love Breakfast Show joining us today.
Hello again.
Hello again, thank you. Okay, so a recent headline in the Evening Post says that the new cladding in Bristol is flammable. What do you say to that? Let's throw you straight at the deep end.
Well, we know that our cladding isn't flammable, and it isn't just about the cladding, it's about how you put it on the buildings as well. So in London there was an air gap between the insulation and the cladding, which, fire needs oxygen. It doesn't work without it. Our cladding is and insulation is one unit, which is then stuck directly to the walls. So there's no, even if you could take a piece off and set fire to it and burn it, it can't burn in situ. And we have had an unfortunate instance in Bristol where flats have caught fire and the fire has got out of the windows. It's the cladding that's been there has not caught fire because it's designed not to. And the fires haven't spread beyond the flats because the way the flats are built, they're also designed to contain any fire.
Let's get to the basics. Exactly what is cladding for, and why is it being put on all the tower blocks at the moment?
There's two reasons why we've been putting it on the blocks in Bristol, and it's of the 59 blocks that we've got, 34 have got cladding on them. It's got two functions. One is to improve the thermal efficiency of the building, i.e. make it cheaper to heat the building, reduce people's energy bills, and also reduce carbon dioxide emissions and climate change effects and all the rest of it. And the other reason is to protect the buildings from the weather. So it's to give the buildings a longer life, to make sure that water doesn't get in when it rains, which it does sometimes in Bristol. Don't know if you've noticed. So it's very, very practical thing to do, and that's why we've been doing it over a period of time.
Okay, now we've been talking about you coming on the show over the last few days on social media, and a few listeners have asked me to ask you a few questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely fine.
Great. So we got Mike Borthwick ask if schools and other council blocks, not just tower blocks, will be inspected.
Yeah, we're looking at every building we've got. Absolutely every building, schools, low-rise properties that aren't high-rise, and offices and other buildings. We're having to rely on housing associations and private companies to check their own, but we're working closely with the fire service, and they're going round to owners of buildings which aren't council buildings to check them out.
Well, unfortunately, we were going to have a spokesperson from the Avon Fire and Rescue Services, but at the last minute said somebody couldn't come down, which is a real shame. But what exactly are they involved with doing at the moment?
Well, in terms of working with us, we've had a programme of going around all of our blocks with the fire service, talking to people, but also doing a check on the blocks as well.
So there are daily inspections going on at the moment. Is that right?
There are. Our own staff are, for instance, making sure that fire doors aren't propped open and the like on a daily basis. We've had lots of people phoning us up saying they think their smoke alarm doesn't work. So we've had lots of staff out checking the smoke alarms. we're also trying to educate people, because we know some people, for instance, are disconnecting their smoke alarms because they like to have smoky rooms. And we're trying to say to people, don't prop the fire doors open, don't put rubbish in the fire escapes, because rubbish can burn, but also it can block escapes if there is a fire. And please don't disconnect your smoke alarms just because you like to have your joss sticks in your flat or whatever. They're there for a reason.
Yeah. So would something like a joss stick or somebody who's a heavy smoker set the fire alarms off? The smoke alarms, sorry. Yeah.
They can do. I
Right.
mean, it depends how sensitive the smoke alarm is, but they're there to detect smoke.
Yeah.
I mean, I set them off all the time if I'm grilling sausages.
Yeah.
So, they
Okay.
can be set off, but they're there to keep people safe.
Okay, just before we ask the next question, because you mentioned about some fire aspects and fire safety in the council buildings, is it true that the fire extinguishers have been moved from all the tower blocks? And if so, why?
Where we had fire extinguishers, they have been removed. It's on advice of the fire service. Basically, what they don't want is people who aren't trained trying to fight fires. What they want is people to phone up the fire brigade, dial 999, and for the fire brigade to go in and stop a fire. If there's a fire in your flat, don't spend 15 minutes trying to put it out. Get out of the flat, phone 999, get the fire brigade, the experts, to do it.
Yeah, I don't know. So half of me feels like, you ring the fire brigade, and then surely if you've got a fire extinguisher, then that would be the next step.
Well, it depends, because sometimes people can use the wrong type of fire extinguisher on a fire, and it could actually be much more dangerous,
Right.
If the fire is electrical and you put water on it, you're probably going to kill yourself. So we don't want people using fire extinguishers themselves.
Okay, so ring 999.
Yeah.
Okay, so
and
the
next... Get out, get
out.
yourself somewhere safe, close the door. The door on a flat will keep a fire in it for an hour. Yes, the fire brigade say they'll get to any fire within 10 minutes. So, that means that other people are safe too.
Okay, so the next listener question, Trudy Wells, is concerned about all the new high-rise student accommodation that has been built. Who's responsible for that, and what will happen?
Well, it's the providers of that accommodation. I've spoken to Unite already, which is the largest student provider, and they've confirmed that they don't have any of this type of cladding on their buildings, but the fire service will be going around all the owners of clad buildings to check what it is they're using.
Okay, so yes, it's getting your head around what is cladded and what isn't. I get that. Okay, so Delroy Hibbert asks what will happen about business premises, but I guess this is the same answer.
It's exactly the same answer. Hello,
okay.
Delroy.
Yeah. Hi. Okay, so the last question from listener Judith Davis. I'm not sure if part of this has already been answered, but let's ask a question anyway. Judith Davis asks about buildings that are 4 stories high with multiple occupancy. Is there a plan and a timetable, grassroots engagement with tenants and leaseholders from Bristol City Council housing team, housing associations and private landlords in various communities throughout Bristol?
Again, where we are the landlord, where we own the properties and we will have tenants and leaseholders in them, we will be checking all of those buildings as well and communicating with those residents. What I've said to councillors that obviously cover the whole city, if in any area they want a public meeting with their residents, then get in touch and we'll set one up. So if Judith wants a meeting in her area about low-rise blocks, then if she just gets in touch with her local councillor, we can set something up.
Okay, that's great. We've got a couple of minutes to the news. Colin, is there anything you wanted to ask?
Well, just that we've been looking at the story on BCFM and Ujima a lot,
of course,
obviously since the tragedy, and a massive respect to all our fire services who worked tirelessly on the Grenfell and still do in Bristol for all their, it's extraordinary that they put themselves beyond, didn't they? They went beyond. Just thinking about that for a second. But regards to the housing, in London, a lot of the early inquiries have brought out these arm's length management organisations, which seem to be a big problem. I just wondered if we have any concerns in Bristol with there being like a step between responsibility between the government in the form of the local government and the actual residents saying, help us, this is not right. Do we have any autonomous, well, the actual technical term is quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisations? Do we have any of those?
Huh?
Do we have any quangos?
Thanks for that, Colin.
Any quangos for buildings?
Well, in terms of Bristol, we haven't been quangoed. So all of our properties are managed direct. There was an attempt to set them up a few years ago within Bristol, but actually tenants decided they didn't want that. We've absolutely got no intention of setting those sorts of things out. I think it confuses the governance, and it's not clear who's in charge. And the more people you've got who can pass the buck, the more easy it is for things to go wrong. So
That's
we
very
won't
reassuring.
be doing that.
That's very reassuring, isn't it, for everyone in Bristol? Surely that's fantastic news.
Absolutely. Obviously, it's been a week or so since Grenfell happened. What were your first thoughts when you heard about it?
Well, my first thought was it was just sort of a look of despair when seeing it. I was just thinking, imagine being in one of the higher floors, the fire's below you, seeing it coming towards you. I mean, what must that be like? It's just unimaginable beyond.
Well,
beyond
for
words.
me, it's reminiscent of 9/11. The horrifying stories of people having to jump out of buildings and children being thrown from windows. It just doesn't bear thinking about. And I think we don't want to get too caught up in that here in Bristol. We want to talk about what is going on here. And how safe our buildings really are in here. So we're just going to take a bit of a break for the headline news, and then we'll come back and talk some more. Okay. Thank you, Paul. We're talking to Paul Smith, who's the Cabinet Minister for Housing here at Bristol City Council, and also Colin Moody, who's from the One Love Breakfast Show, is joining us as well. My name's Miranda. You're listening to The Word here on Ujima Radio. Joining me in the studio today, we have Colin Moody, who's here from the One Love Breakfast Show. Thank you. Welcome back, Colin. And, of course, the one and only Paul Smith, who is the Cabinet Minister for Housing here at the Bristol City Council. So thank you so much for coming in today, because I know it must be a really busy time for you. How do you kind of deal with something like this when you've got sort of like your rolling, you've got your normal timetable anyway, and something like this happens, it just must go crazy. How do you deal with it?
Well, some things we stopped doing,
yeah.
That we ordinarily done. You sort of rearrange meetings, put things back, and try and cram in, as much time as we can to this in the gaps that we found that we had in our diaries.
Well, you also mentioned that there's 59 tower blocks in Bristol. What? How high do you have to be pronounced a tower block?
Over 6 stories.
Over 6 stories. Okay. So, how come it takes something like this Grenfell tragedy to have all these inspections done?
But we actually do annual inspections of all of our properties with the fire service. What this has meant is that we've done additional meetings as well with residents. And, we've got caretakers and housing officers who are in the buildings all the time, checking that the fire doors are closing, that there isn't rubbish in the escape areas. So in some respects, the things that we're doing now are things that we've always done. It's obviously given us a reason to do a particular look at the properties. Luckily, we didn't have any of the aluminium cladding, which has caused the fire, and the government has not asked us to send any samples to be tested because we haven't got any.
So just to clarify, all the buildings, all the tower blocks here in Bristol, they do not have the flammable cladding that was on Grenfell?
No, none of our buildings at all.
None of the buildings
at
all?
Even smaller buildings. So it's not just the tower blocks. But no, they don't. But we're still looking at how we need to investigate all of the cladding that we've got, just to make sure, just to give people that security. We can't do it through the government scheme because the government doesn't want ours cladding, so we'll be bringing in independent investigators to check through all of our cladding over the coming months. It won't be immediately done, but we want to make sure that we do have that special check as well. But we're feeling fairly secure because it's not just about the material, it's also about the way it's constructed. So we have fire breaks between each floor, so even if in the unlikely instant of some cladding catching fire, it wouldn't spread beyond the floor that it's on. So and as I said before, we've had fires in flats with cladding, and the fire has not spread through the cladding.
So Colin, speaking to your question for you now, Paul, is that's very reassuring. Let's just open it slightly wider. We've got all 4 Bristol MPs now calling for improved quantities and qualities of home building in this area, and also fire safety as well. Obviously, fire safety is a big issue. That's the main topic we're talking about here today. But also, all the new houses that are being built, are we absolutely sure they're going to be safe? And are they the right kind of houses? It's kind of like 3 questions in one for you. Yeah,
and of course, a lot of the housing that's being built in Bristol will be flats, and we will see tower blocks being built in Bristol as well. And I worked very closely with the 4 MPs. I did brief them before they put their letter into the Minister, and I was very pleased with what they were saying. But yeah, absolutely, safety's got to come first. There's no point doing things which superficially look like they're helpful, but which are putting people's life at risk.
I'm also concerned that what happened in Grenfell in London has created a divide between those who have and those who have not, those who are in social housing, those that aren't. And there are some people that are now saying, I don't want to be near people in social housing because it seems they think fire risk as well. there's some strange ideas floating around right now. But what are you doing to combat any kind of murmurings that are out there about social housing having a stigma attached to it because of Grenfell?
Well, of course, we're coming on to Ujima and BCFM and Radio Bristol and ITV and BBC and just trying to explain to people that as far as we know at the moment there are no problems of this kind in Bristol. Where we've had fires, they've been contained within the individual flats. We probably have one fire a year within our tower blocks. We had a fire recently in a low rise. There, the fire got out of the window. 2 bits of cladding fell off, but they didn't actually catch fire in any way. So we're fairly confident that what we've got in Bristol is safe, and that people's lives aren't at risk as long as they don't do stupid things within their flats. I mean, we did have, for instance, you get cases every now and again in all types of housing where people think, well, it's raining, maybe that barbecue I was going to have, I'll have in my living room. Unfortunately, that usually leads to people dying, usually from the smoke first. They get poisoned through carbon monoxide, and then the fire catches later because the people have died.
And like you said earlier, don't turn your smoke alarms off because that's there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't prop open fire doors.
What's the one question you found that residents have been asking? Is there one outstanding point that people are worried about?
I think the people who are most worried are the people who are higher up in the blocks, and particularly in blocks where there's only one stairwell. So
what would your advice to be if you were in a higher floor and a fire broke out? What would you say is the best thing to do?
Well, we still agree with the fire service that the stay put policy is the best one, although it's much more nuanced than is often described. So there are 4 caveats to that stay put. One, if there's a fire in your flat, get out, call a fire brigade. If you can smell smoke in your flat, so there might not be a fire in your flat, might be somewhere else, but if you can smell smoke in your flat, phone the fire brigade and get out of your flat, close the door, get out of the building. If you're in a communal and there's a fire, get out of the building. And if you feel really unsafe, don't stay there if you feel unsafe, get out. But generally, and this has worked well within Bristol, if there's a fire, stay in until the fire brigade come round and either say to you, it's okay to stay, or to come out. And that, for instance, happened in Littlemore, which is one of our biggest blocks. A couple of years ago, there was a fire in one of the flats. It stayed in the flat. But as a precautionary measure, the people in that side of the block and near that flat were moved out overnight into hotels and then moved back in a couple of days later once everything had been cleaned up.
Looking at what happened recently, the Conservative MPs were cheering at the fact there's a pay cap has been kept on essential workers, which includes the fire service. So you've got fire brigade officers, and some of them in London have posted on social media as well that, I'm in my 50s, I have to keep working for the fire service. Are we actually pushing our services, do you think, too far? Because if I'm on the 20th floor of a tower block and the fire service are on a cap, but they still have the duty of care to come and help put the fire out, but they're now 40, 50, getting older. Are we actually, you're looking after the housing, but are we missing out on actually addressing a bigger picture, which might be the services that would be responsible for putting out fires are being stretched to breaking points at this time?
The cuts we've had in our emergency services, in the council, in our health services are all having an impact. They're not without effect. One of the problems for the fire service is because they've been cutting back numbers, they've not been recruiting new, younger people in, which means that when we get the fire service turning up on these visits, they haven't got lots of young, hunky men to attract lots of people down to see them. Lots of people who are quite middle-aged, and we need to make these services attractive to a new generation really coming in. Yeah. And by capping their pay and making people who are in those services feared about, will there be another restructure, will there be more cuts, actually makes those services less attractive to people.
Which is where it sort of brings you back to how so many residents of Grenfell feel that this has been a result of austerity and that something like this has happened as a direct result. So I've just got to say thanks to Colin Moody from the One Love Breakfast Show and to Paul Smith for coming in. I really appreciate it because I know how busy you must be over the next couple of weeks. What is the timetable then if residents want to know if their building has or will be inspected? Is there a way they can find out and go online?
Actually,
isn't there a
it's-
timetable
it's-
printed out?
There was a timetable, but I find it really difficult to find it on the council's website. But what we're about to send another letter out to our tenants
Great.
in blocks, and I am saying to people, if you want to contact us, contact the council, email the council if you've got any questions. Let us know. If you want a meeting in your area, contact your local councillor and we'll set those up. This isn't something that happens as a one-off. We're continually inspecting the buildings. We're continually engaged with our tenants.
Yeah.
It's not like we've been to a block now and that's it.
Colin, we've maybe got time for a little question.
Oh, just a quick one. I know that Michael Sheen, the actor, says that the film that both you and I want to go and see at the Watershed, he says the housing crisis is one of our nation's biggest scandals and this film shows us it's deliberate. What are your thoughts about that?
I grew up in council housing. It gave me me and my family the first chance. The way in which council housing and council services generally have been underfunded, disinvested from, run down, insulted has been an absolute disgrace. In Bristol, if you were in Bristol, 30 years ago, there would have been 47 council homes, which would have helped mopped up homelessness and allowed a lot of people somewhere to start their lives and bring up their families. Now there's only 26,000. That's an absolute disgrace.
It is. And thank you, Paul, for speaking so openly and honestly. I know how busy you are. Colin and Paul Smith, the Cabinet Minister for Housing at Bristol City Council, thank you very much for coming in. And Colin Moody from the One Love Breakfast Show. You're listening to The Word on Ujima. We're just going to take a bit of a break. We'll be back soon.
The Word with Miranda.